Sometimes, on quiet December evenings, when the fire in the grate has settled into a steady glow and the windows have turned into dark mirrors, I take an old cookbook down from the shelf. The cover is rubbed smooth. The spine creaks when it opens. The pages smell faintly of vanilla and dust. Betty Crocker, 1950s. When I was a child, that book meant one thing. Someone was about to boil sugar. At Christmas, my grandmother would lay it on the kitchen table next to the fogged-up window and turn the pages slowly. She almost never read the recipes out loud. Her fingers simply knew where to stop. They always paused first on a page freckled with old sugar stains and a faded heading, Penuche. Penuche was our brown fudge. Long before chocolate fudge took over church basements and bake sales, cooks in New England were already making this brown sugar version in the late 19th century. Chocolate was expensive. Brown sugar, with its stubborn molasses, had to do all the work. I used to stand on a chair by the stove and watch the bubbles change as she stirred. She would tilt the spoon and show me how the syrup fell, too thin, too thick. And then finally, just right. Off the heat, she beat it until the shine went dull and the mixture began to hold its own shape. On the plate, it looked modest. Pale squares, nothing showy. On the tongue, it was butter and caramel and a faint hint of smoke. The taste of a time when you stretched what you had and still called it fudge. When that pan of Penuche was cooling on the counter, she would wipe her hands on her apron and turn another thin page. The paper there is a little whiter, a little less stained, as if even inside this book, Divinity had always floated above the rest. Divinity is a candy with Southern roots. In the early 1900s, newspapers in the American South called it a new favorite, and the story goes that the name stuck because everyone who tasted it said the same thing. It's simply divine. My grandmother had one rule for it: never on a rainy day. She would open the back door, test the air with her cheek, and say, "Not today, the candy won't behave." On the right day, she boiled sugar and corn syrup, then poured it in a thin, dangerous ribbon into whipped egg whites, while the mixer rattled the whole counter. To me, it looked like a magic trick, a bowl of almost nothing becoming a bowl of bright, billowing cloud. She dropped it by spoons onto wax paper. Each spoonful twisted into its own little storm and then slowly froze. When it finally set, it was light and fragile, a piece of weather you could eat, and a reminder that some sweets obey the humidity as much as the cook. Later in the evening, when the kitchen had cooled and the windows were white with steam, she would turn to a page that smelled faintly different. The sugar stains there share space with darker rings, as if someone once set down a glass in a hurry. Bourbon Balls. These are a younger invention. Most food historians point to Kentucky in the 1930s, when someone mixed broken cookies with the last inches of good bourbon and discovered that thrift could be festive. By the 1950s, the recipe was already in church bulletins and ladies' magazines, usually with a small warning in brackets: "Not for children." My grandmother followed that rule. I watched from the doorway as she crushed vanilla wafers in a dish towel, stirred in cocoa, powdered sugar, chopped nuts, and that careful splash from a brown bottle she only opened at Christmas. She rolled the mixture into small, sticky marbles and dusted them in sugar. And then she did the hardest part. She put them away. "Not yet," she'd say, snapping the tin shut. "They have to sit and think about what they've done." Days later, when the adults gathered by the fire with coffee, the tin would reappear. By then the sharp edge of the alcohol had softened. The bourbon was no longer a shout, just a slow warmth at the back of the throat. For years I only knew them by the way the room changed when the lid came off. Some pages of the book actually crackle when you turn them. The one for peanut brittle sounds almost like the candy itself. Peanut brittle is older than my grandmother, older than the brand names on the cover. Recipes for brittle show up in 19th century papers, but it was during the lean years of the Great Depression that peanut brittle really earned its place. Peanuts were cheap. Fancy nuts were not. A cup of sugar, a handful of peanuts, a spoonful of baking soda for lift. And suddenly, a poor kitchen had something that broke with a beautiful sound. I remember that sound more than anything. She cooked the syrup until it was almost frighteningly dark, the whole room filling with a sharp, toasted sweetness. Baking soda went in at the very last second. The mixture foamed and rose, and she rushed to spread it thin before it set. When it cooled, she never cut it. She took the sheet in both hands and snapped it like ice. It cracked along its own invisible fault lines, sending bright shards skittering across the tray. In our house, that first snap was the moment Christmas officially began. If you keep going deeper into the book, past the glossy photographs and into the smaller type, you eventually find a quieter recipe. Date nut roll. On the page it doesn't look like much. Dates, sugar, butter, cream, nuts, coconut. But this sweet belongs to the early 20th century faith in sensible treats. Dates were advertised as concentrated energy, sunshine you could store in a cupboard. During the war years and after, when rationing still lived in people's habits, a roll of dates and walnuts felt almost responsible. Dessert you could justify to yourself. In my memory, the house always felt warmer when she made it. She cooked the dates down until they collapsed into a dark, glossy paste, stirred in chopped walnuts, and rolled the hot mixture into a tight cylinder with quick, bare hands. Once it cooled in its coat of coconut, she sliced it thin. Only then did it show its secret. A plain brown log turning into little circles filled with stars, pale nuts and dark fruit in every slice. She would always hand me the first one as if she were passing me a small ticket back into her own childhood. 5 candies. On the page, they're only recipes. Cups and degrees, minutes and notes in small print about humidity. But in my mind, they're evenings. The hiss of steam on the window, the rattle of a candy thermometer against a pot, the dull ache in an arm that has been beating fudge for too long. Each of them was once a Christmas tradition. Each of them cost next to nothing in 1955. And each of them disappeared quietly. When convenience began to feel more valuable than skill, it is easier now to buy a box. The chocolate is glossy, the wrapping clever, the selection already made for us. But a box has no memory of the day the Divinity refused to set because a storm rolled in early, or of the year peanut brittle saved Christmas because there was nothing else in the house but sugar and peanuts. These old Christmas candies are vanishing one household at a time. What goes with them is not just a set of flavors, but a small stubborn belief that a winter evening, a good fire, and a little patience at the stove are enough to turn sugar into something that feels like love. And every time I open this stained old cookbook again, with the fire crackling in exactly the same way, I can almost smell her kitchen. Brown sugar, toasted nuts, a hint of bourbon, steam on the glass, and it feels, for a moment, as if my grandmother is still standing at the stove, making December for us both.